Okay, welcome to session 4 out of 4 on the Nazi policy and how it impacted different groups of people. So session 1 was on workers, session 2 was on women, session 3 we've just done on young people. This is the last one. This is going to be about how did Nazi rules and policies impact the lives of the Jews. If you are doing this in your booklet during lockdown, then this is the last few pages. If you're using this to revise, then obviously you won't have your booklet with you. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of tasks that look at laws, the Nuremberg laws. Then we're going to look at Kristallnacht, which was a night that shows us the impact that Nazi policies were having on the lives of Jews. So let's get started. The first task that you'll see in your booklet is a Nazi propaganda poster. I'd like you to pause the video here and use the skills that you've developed over the past few months to think about symbolism and clues that you can see in this poster that tell us what do the Nazis want people to think about Jews. As a challenge, you can look at the other poster and compare how they want Jews to be represented as to how they want Germans or Aryans to be represented. And then we'll just go through it as a group once you press play. So pause the video and label your poster. Okay, so you are allowed to label around in your booklet, that's absolutely fine. Hopefully you picked up some symbolism. So we have got like a random bit of stone in the poster with a red symbol on it. That's the symbol for communism. So if they've got the communist symbol on this poster, they're trying to imply that Jews are communists or sympathise with the communists. Remember, they're Hitler's biggest rivals at this time, and a lot of people are afraid of communists because their ideals are really radical. They're far too radical. Rich people are particularly afraid of communists. Other symbols we can see is a whip in his hand. A whip could be a symbol of violence, so Jews are violent. He's got money in his other hand and he's almost like he's reaching out to us, which could be a symbol that Jewish people are greedy. Remember, a lot of Jewish people were money lenders in the 1930s, so they would have given people loans, and then obviously they would need to call back in those loans at some point. So people always said the stereotype that all Jews are greedy when they were just lending money. And then you've just kind of got like a long black coat. He's kind of got a bit of a hunchback, a scraggly beard. He's got the stereotypical kind of facial features going on. So they're trying to kind of show that Jews are, you can spot a Jew easily. They're violent, they're communists, they're greedy, and wearing black kind of implies that they're like villains. So obviously this is the image that a lot of people are going to see every day in the streets, in films, obviously being described in speeches and things like that. So eventually, not everybody, but a lot of people are going to start to think that that is kind of like what your typical Jew would be like. So don't trust Jews because they're greedy or they're violent or they might like sympathise and do a communist uprising. So this is one of the key reasons why Hitler wanted to make people think this about Jews, because he's going to use them as a scapegoat. He's going to blame them for all of Germany's problems so that people can not put the blame on the government and him, and instead put the blame on a different ethnicity that's got nothing to do with Germany. And then he's obviously going to use that. He has a personal vendetta against Jews as well, and he's going to use that to get rid of 6 million Jews, as we know later on in the Holocaust in the 1940s. So how does Hitler get away with doing this? You can't just target a certain group of people with a couple of posters and everybody kind of be on board. So we're going to look at Jews historically and how they've been persecuted over hundreds of years. This wasn't just a World War II kind of thing. Jewish race have been stereotyped and targeted and treated really badly for hundreds and hundreds of years. I've broken it down into why Jews are persecuted because of the Middle Ages. Jews are persecuted because of things that happened in Hitler's life when he was younger, and then we're going to look at some examples of Nazi policy. If you look at the next slide, I've got pages 58 of the textbook that's got the mind map on it, but you could have a little think to yourself before you read that slide and see if you can think about what was going on in the Middle Ages that would make people not like Jews and target them. Do you know what happened in Hitler's early life that did that as well? And then we can check the answers together on the next slide. Okay, so the top orange box is about the Middle Ages. Jewish people have been persecuted throughout history, for example in England during the Middle Ages. This is because Jewish people stood out as different in regions across Europe. They had a different religion and different customs. Some Christians blamed the Jews for the execution of Christ and argued that Jews should be punished forever. Some Jews became moneylenders and became quite wealthy. This increased people's resentment and suspicion because a lot of people owed them money or were jealous of how successful they were. So we've got quite a few reasons there. You can copy it as a paragraph or you can bullet point it if you'd rather. So one of the reasons Jews have been persecuted in the Middle Ages is because they stood out. They were different to everybody else. So they had a different religion. They weren't Christian or Muslim, which would have been the two main religions. They would have dressed differently. So you could, I don't know if you've seen, but like the men have kind of long hair that's almost like ringleted. They wear different types of hats as well, and they're quite modest clothing and things like that. And they have different eating habits as well. So they stood out for that reason. Now, the Jewish faith began in Israel and Jerusalem. And because of the persecution of the Jews and the fighting that happened there, a lot of Jewish people had moved away and spread out across Europe. And that means that they're the minority, so they're the small amount of people in a group. Now, what usually happens if you have a minority in a country, they're the ones that get picked on, and people start to blame them and pick on them because they're small and they can. So if you've got a couple of Jews living in a town in Italy, or you've got a couple of thousand living in a town in Spain, but you haven't got millions and millions like you would Spanish people living in Spain or English people living in England. So they stand out for that reason as well. Then you can go all the way back to the Bible, and they say that Pontius Pilate or the Jews killed Jesus, and obviously most people in England in particular are Christian then, so they would have blamed the Jews for that. And then we've got the money lending thing as well. Jews were also blamed for the plague because, like I said, Jews were moving around the world and the plague moved around the world with them. We know that it was on the fleas that were on the rats, but a lot of people blamed the Jews, and Jews were actually murdered as a cure, as a way of preventing you from getting plague. So that's another thing you could add to the medieval era. Hitler's early life is the bit in blue. So Hitler had spent several years in Vienna, which is in Austria, where there was a long tradition of being anti-Semitic, which means being anti-Jew. So he kind of grown up with people that being normal. He lived as a down and out and resented the wealth of many of the Viennese Jews. In the 1920s, he used the Jews as a scapegoat for society's problems. He blamed them for Germany's defeat in the First World War, for hyperinflation in 1923 and the Great Depression of 1929. So basically, he was jealous. A lot of people say that he wanted to get into art school and the place was given to a Jewish student instead. We're not 100% sure about that, but he definitely resented how rich he saw a lot of Jewish people when he was growing up. In terms of blaming them for World War I, we can't exactly say that, can we? Hyperinflation we know was the Weimar government, and the Great Depression of 1929 we knew was America. So he's kind of blaming the Jews, and people would go along with that because it's easier to blame them than to blame their own country. So what was he going to do about it? Hitler was determined to create a pure racial state. This did not include the 500,000 Jews who were living in Germany. He wanted to eliminate the Jews from German society. He had no master plan for achieving this. However, and until the beginning of the Second World War, a great deal of Nazi Jewish policy was uncoordinated, which means random. So he had a 4-year plan for starting a world war, but he never had a 4-year plan for getting rid of the Jews. He kind of just took it as it went, and we're going to see how they used opportunities that came along in order to target the Jews. So he apparently never planned for the Holocaust. So he has this policy of Germans are the best, they're the pure race, Aryans in particular. So what a great opportunity to target people who look the opposite to blonde hair, blue eyes. We've got dark hair, dark eyes. So that's going to be one of his policies, is to eliminate the Jewish race from Germany. So we're going to look at how he goes about doing that in the next part of this. Turn to the page that looks like the mind map at the bottom of this slide here. Measures taken against the Jews. There was a lot of laws that Hitler passed in the 30s and 40s that specifically were for Jews. And the aim of most of these rules was to separate Jews from other Germans. So if you can separate them via law, you can then start to physically separate them from other groups. And that means that Germans will feel more superior to Jews. And later on, when Hitler gets rid of them, sends them to concentration camps, people will be on board with it because the law has said that Jews are physically not as superior as Germans. So the name of these laws were called the Nuremberg laws. They were a set of laws that took place over a number of years that targeted the Jewish race and, like I said, separated them from the Germans. So that's what you could put in the what were the Nuremberg laws at the bottom of the mind map. I'm going to kind of split that flowchart into two on the next two slides for you so that you can read through the rules properly. And then I want you to put them on the correct part of the mind map. We've got social, which is a law that affects everyday life of the Jews living in Germany, their relationships with other people. Political, which is anything that affects their legal rights and how much power they have. And economic, which is anything that's going to affect their wage, their money and jobs. So I'll do the first few with you, then I'll advise you to pause the video so that you can do the rest on your own, and then I'll go through them quickly so that you can check your answers. Okay? So, measures taken against the Jews. Persecution in the Jews in the 1930s was irregular. Initially, there was the economic boycott, which was not well supported and disliked by many Germans. Then legal and open discrimination increased in the years 19 to 1936, but diminished during the Olympics. So the Olympics came to Germany in the 1936, and Hitler suspended all the anti-Jewish laws because countries from all over the world were coming to Germany and everybody was watching Germany and he didn't want to come across as anti-Semitic. But then as soon as the Olympics were over, he went back to it. Persecution then increased with further legislation, which means laws, and a big event called Kristallnacht, which we're going to look at in a couple of moments. Increased numbers of Jews had left Germany by the end of the 1930s. The figure below summarises the different laws taken against the Jews. So in 1933, we've got three key things that happen. The SA organised a boycott of Jewish shops and businesses. They painted the word Jude, which is German for Jew, on the windows and tried to persuade the public not to enter. Thousands of Jewish civil servants, which are people that work for the government, lawyers and university teachers, were sacked. So you could summarise that as saying people stopped going to Jewish businesses and thousands of Jewish workers were sacked. Which part of your mind map would that go into? Would it go into social, which is everyday life, economic, which is money and jobs, or political, which is legal rights and power? Because it's to do with business and jobs, I'd be putting those into economic. So you don't have to copy it word for word like it is on there, you could just bullet point it. A new law excluded Jews from government jobs. Jewish books were burnt. That's kind of similar to what we've said. You could put the Jewish books being burnt because that's different. I'd probably put that in social because that's affecting people's everyday lives. So you're not allowed to read a book that was written by a Jewish person because that makes Jews look clever and cultural, and Hitler doesn't want that. And Jews were banned from inheriting land. So if your family had an estate and then like your dad died, you wouldn't get that land, it would go to the German government instead, and that's going to make you poor. So if you feel like that's worth putting, I put that into economic, but you don't have to put that one down. Okay, 1934, local councils banned Jewish people from public spaces, so Jews weren't allowed to be in parks, playing fields or swimming pools. So they don't want them physically mingling with Germans. So you'd have all these signs kind of saying like no Jews allowed in this restaurant, things like that. Is that going to go into economic, political or social? You could kind of argue that that is social because it's affecting their everyday life, but it's also a bit of political, isn't it? Because it's taking away their rights. So you can either put that in both, or if I had to push it, it would probably be everyday life, wouldn't it? Like not being allowed to go to the park and stuff. I'd pause this video here, read through what happened in 1935, decide which of those rules you think are worth putting in your mind map, and then obviously decide where you're going to put them. I'll go through the answers with you in a moment, and then read the 3 years on the next slide and do the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to go through 1935 with you. So Jews were no longer drafted into the army. I'm not sure. I mean, you could put that one down. I think it's the most important rule. But if you did, you'd probably, I mean, they're not going to get a wage for it. It's taken away their power, so economic or political. Restaurants were closed to Jews. We've already said that, really, haven't we? September, the Nuremberg laws were a series of measures aimed against the Jews passed on the 15th of September. These included the Reich law on citizenship, which stated that only those of pure German blood could be German citizens. So Jews lost their citizenship, which meant they lost their right to vote, run for government, and so on. The law for the protection of German blood and honour forbid marriage or sexual relations between Jews and German citizens. So I would be putting the Nuremberg laws into probably political, because they're taking away the German citizenship, which means that you don't have like the right to be represented in court if you get arrested. You don't have the right to vote and things like that, so that's definitely political. You could put law for the protection of German blood and honour into political as well, because it's taken away their rights, but maybe also social, because you're not allowed to get married to somebody who's not a Jew if you're a Jew. They did things like making them wear the Star of David. That was another thing that comes into the Nuremberg laws. So they used to have to wear a yellow star with the word Jude in it, and that was so that they could physically be separated and people could see if you were a Jew or not. That meant that you weren't allowed into restaurants or jobs, or people kind of like cross the street to avoid you, or you'd be spat on or randomly arrested or something like that. Okay, let's move on to the next lot. 1936. The professional activities of Jews were banned or restricted. This included being a vet, dentist, accountant, surveyor, teacher or nurse. So lots of Jews weren't allowed to have top ranking jobs. So that would go into economic. And then obviously we've got the Olympics, so things calmed down in 1936. In 1937, for the first time in 2 years, Hitler publicly attacked the Jews. More and more Jewish businesses were taken over. I don't think that's probably worth writing down. 1938, Jews had to register their possessions, making it easier to confiscate them. I guess I'd put that in political, maybe, because that's taking away your rights to having your own stuff. Jews had to carry identity cards. Jewish doctors, dentists and lawyers were forbidden to treat Aryans. So I definitely put that down. I put the not being allowed to treat people as economic because you're losing money. But maybe carrying identity cards could be either social probably, or maybe because it's affecting your relationship with other people, isn't it, to be physically separated. August, Jewish men had the name Israel added to their name, and Jewish women had to have Sarah. This was so that when you were reading about somebody, like say applying for a job or something like that, then you would know who was a Jewish person and who wasn't, because they would have Israel or Sarah in front of their names. I would probably say that's taking away your rights, isn't it? I think, like forcing a name on you so you're physically separated. Jews had the red letter J stamped to their passports, and then we've got Kristallnacht, where Jewish children being excluded from schools. So I would maybe not bother with the J stamped on passports, because that's the same as the Star of David, although if you did, I'd probably put that into political. Kristallnacht, we're going to look at in more detail now, but I would put that into economic, political and social, because it affected every part of their lives. And then Jewish children being excluded from schools, I probably put that into political because it's taking away your rights, but then also social because it's affecting your life every day, your education, things like that. So from 33, when Hitler comes to power, till 38, when he's about to start a war, he has a series of rules and things that come in place that take more and more rights away from Jewish people, that leave them poorer and poorer with no work. And then remember, he's also opening ghettos and places like that at this time. So he's putting a lot of Jewish people into tiny areas of towns and cities where there's no running water, hardly any food, and he's kind of forcing them to live in this tight space. And then that's in 1959 that happens, that he opens the ghettos in 1940. So all of this is leading up to kind of physically removing Jews from key areas of Germany. And then we obviously know in the 1940s that's going to end in the concentration camps. Now, we don't look at ghettos and concentration camps because our topic ends in 1939, but it's just important that you know that that's where all these policies are leading to. So make sure you've got everything right on your mind map. And then we will move on to looking at summarising Nazi policy. So go back to page 2 and 3 from the booklet where we divided it into 4 sections. We've done women, we've done workers, we did the young people last lesson. So you're going to fill in the last box on Nazi policies for Jews. So can you name 3 policies that involved Jews and describe each one in a sentence? So you could do restaurants being shut, you could do having the name Israel or Sarah, you could have doctors not being allowed to treat patients. There's loads. Basically pick anything from that flow chart, pick 3 things. How did these policies change the lives of Jews? What would it have done to their lives? And which policy do you think had the biggest impact on the lives of Jews and why? If you had to pick one from that flow chart, which do you think would be the most important and why? So put those in that part of your booklet and then go back to near the end of your booklet and we're going to look at an event called Kristallnacht, which will have a causes, events, consequences diagram. So once you finish that, get onto that page for me. Okay, so all of this policy ends with an event called Kristallnacht in 1938. So we're going to look at what happened and we're going to look at the impact it had on people's lives and why it's so important. So go to this page in your booklet, which has got causes, events and consequences. We're going to look at the causes together. There's going to be a clip that I want you to watch that looks at events and consequences. So you're going to have to pause this video and then upload the separate clip and then come back to this video once you've watched that clip. As usual, I'll put the clip on SharePoint, I'll put the clip on YouTube playlist and I'll put the clip on the school Instagram account as well. Okay, so let's look at the causes of Kristallnacht. There was a single small event that triggered this night. Kristallnacht in English is called the Night of Broken Glass. I always use the word crystal and glass kind of helps me work that out. So what's going to lead to this Night of Broken Glass? On the 8th of November 1938, a young Polish Jew named Herschel Greenspan walked into the German embassy in Paris and shot the first official he saw, which happened to be a Nazi officer. So key thing here is the person being attacked is a Nazi and the person doing the attacking is a Jew. He did it because he was protesting against the treatment of his parents in Germany who had been deported to Poland. So because his parents were Jewish, they'd been kicked out of Germany and sent to live in Poland. Herschel was really angry about this, so he got his gun, walked into the German embassy where he lived and shot a Nazi officer. Joseph Goebbels, who remember is the head of propaganda, uses this as an opportunity to organise anti-Jewish demonstrations. So Joseph Goebbels hears about this. Usually that would kind of be swept under the rug, but because a Jewish person has shot a Nazi, Goebbels thinks this is a great opportunity to tell people how evil Jews are and how we should kind of rise up against them because he's attacked an innocent Nazi officer. So they use it as kind of an excuse to have a riot, essentially. But that's not the only thing that triggers Kristallnacht. We have to think about all the things that have been happening before as well. So in your causes part of your diagram, you could start your first bullet point by saying, on the 8th of November, a Polish Jew shoots a Nazi officer in France. And then we could say that Goebbels uses this as an opportunity to launch riots against the Jews. But what else has been building up that means that people want to riot against the Jews? So we could say that the Nuremberg laws have physically separated Jews and Germans from each other, taken away the freedom of the Jews, made people think that Jews are less than them. We've also had anti-Jewish propaganda, had turned people against Jews and made them think that they were greedy and they were the people to blame for all of Germany's problems. So the anger towards the Jews has been building up for a number of years because of Nazi propaganda and policy. So it's not just that event that triggers it, we also have to add the things that have been building up over a period of years. So make sure you've got that in your diagram. You can pause this if you need to catch up. Okay, so if you go onto the CCBC history playlist, YouTube playlist, and go onto the Germany playlist, there is a video called Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass. There it is in the playlist. I've got the link below. I've also uploaded it onto SharePoint, and I've also hopefully uploaded it onto Instagram. So it's about 13 minutes long. I want you to watch that for me, please, and then just do a bullet point list of the events of the Night of Broken Glass. This is my one, okay, yours might look slightly different to mine. You might want to maybe get some detailed facts in, like numbers and names if you haven't already. So I've started with Goebbels giving a speech saying that people should protest against the Jews. People then take to the streets, they start attacking Jewish shops, they attack Jewish homes, and they attack Jewish synagogues. You can say that they smashed the windows, but they also burnt some of them down. Many windows were smashed, hence the name Night of Broken Glass. Jews were attacked, beaten and arrested. They think that 100 Jews were killed that night and 20,000 were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Okay, so that's kind of like our basic description of what happened. So in terms of consequences this is going to have, you've either used the clip to fill that in, or I'm going to put a slide with a list of consequences up now, and you can choose which ones you want to put into that part of the diagram. So Hitler actually blames Jews for provoking the attacks. So Hitler's trying to use it to make people hate Jews even more. He even fined them 1 billion Reichsmarks to compensate and repay for all the damage caused. Jews can no longer own or manage a business or shop or employ workers. So all the businesses that were destroyed or shut down during Kristallnacht, they don't open again. And if they do, it has to be owned or controlled by a Nazi. Jewish children can no longer go to school. This is a few months later. The Reich Office for Jewish Immigration was established. The SS could now remove Jews through force. So it's slowly taking away more Jewish rights. So this immigration office was essentially just an excuse for them to come in and kick Jews out of Germany. Jews are required to surrender any metal or jewellery that's worth any money. Jews were evicted from their homes and start to be forced into ghettos. And in September, Jews are forced to hand in radio sets so that they couldn't listen to foreign news. So you decide which of those you think is worth putting down. I definitely put they're no longer allowed to own a shop. I definitely put going to the ghettos. Those would be the two that I definitely get down. It also worth putting the consequences of Kristallnacht that a lot of Germans were disgusted by what happened that night. Jews being beaten to death in the streets in front of their families and dragged from their homes. Not all of Germany was on side with this. So what Hitler did is he said that it had been a random act of anger out of what happened when the Herschel had gone and shot the Nazi officer in France. So he kind of used that event as it's just people are super angry, so we need to let them off for what they did. But it's important to know that not all Germans were on board with Kristallnacht. Okay, so there we go. We've looked at Nazi policy, and we're going to skip this task, I think, because it's not really in the booklet. Can you go back to the front of your booklet, please, then, and fill in the answers to the key questions on Nazi policy? And then whenever we're back together in school again, we'll go through the answers together. So well done on doing all 4 sessions. They should have taken you about 2 weeks overall. But if you need a little bit more time, that's fine. When you've finished doing the booklet, if you could send me some pictures of it so that I've got proof. There is an exam question at the end of the booklet, but we're not going to worry about that right now, okay? But we will come back to it at some point when we're all together again. So thank you very much for listening. That's one more booklet in the bag. Well done, Year 10.